I have some questions relating to kind of what I would call the software side, which most people would consider the governance side. And then Max has some as it relates to kind of the physical built environment side as an architect. So my first question, Chirag, is kind of an open-ended one. So I know in the DFC, you have three main governmental bodies within that special economic zone. You have the International FinCentre Authority, you have the Dubai Financial Services Authority, and you have the DIFC courts. Can you explain to me, especially those first two, the kind of jurisdiction they have relative to one another and how the three interplay together to create one of the best environments for doing business in the world?
Yes, so, at the DIFC, like what you do here at Prosper, we created a new country when it came to setting up companies and regulating and doing business, right? So when you're doing that, all the other authorities that are in the local environment are disapplied and they don't have any jurisdiction over there. So you have to create something that kind of addresses all the requirements of any business to operate. So think of it as those, you mentioned about three authorities. So the courts is pretty clear. They come in when there's a dispute or something like that, right? So that's one part of that. But when it comes to the other parts of the government, everything is done by the DIFC authority, which is the core operating authority, except for financial service regulations and supervision. And that is done by the Dubai Financial Services Authority. So think of this as the DFSA is the combination of the Fed and the SEC and all the financial regulators the US has, or for example, in UK, you have the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the Bank of England playing the role of regulating the financial industry. But in addition to that, you have everything else, right, which the government performs, whether it is issuance of visas, registration of companies, giving trade licenses, municipal functions, land registry functions, building permits, everything else. So everything else that the government would normally do as a regulator of business, of activity that's happening over there, would be done by the DIFC authority, which is the center operating body. So that's how broadly we kind of structure the work. And each of these three independent authorities are independent of each other. So that allows to have that balance. So if somebody is overstepping the balance, you have the courts obviously to kind of adjudicate on these matters, but otherwise you have very clear responsibility of what you're doing. And that's very critical, especially for financial industry. You need quite clear independent regulators that can be free of commercial interests when they are regulating these financial firms.
Got it. That makes sense. And obviously working at Prosper, I know firsthand how difficult and expensive it can be to kind of build some of these registries from the ground up, or in the financial industry, for instance, what you guys did over there at the DIFC to kind of build one of the world's most effective, in fact, regulatory and enforcement groups, really. But those people, those financial specialists, especially to stop money laundering, et cetera, are often not cheap. So my question is relating to funding. Is the DIFC self-funded, meaning it has like tax revenues from the jurisdiction that then go back to the DIFC authorities to operate their activities? Or does it receive a subsidy from the greater city of Dubai? And then further, is the DIFC itself or either of these authorities, are these like nonprofits, or are these like for-profits that are looking to grow? So two kind of interrelated questions there.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm glad you asked that, because that's one of the questions a lot of people don't get the answer to correctly, and then they hemorrhage themselves with costs and they effectively kind of sink. You have after the DIFC or before the DIFC, a lot of financial centers or all of these jurisdictions springing up, and they have no clarity on how they will sustain themselves. How are they going to make sure that they're covering all these costs of creating a new country? And that's a pretty important question to ask and answer up front. Having said that, you cannot have all kinds of regulatory bodies be profitable, right? As in all over the world, you have subsidies from the government and so on and so forth. and that may come from the larger pool of taxes typically governments collect, and so on and so forth. The DFC was unique, as in we offered from the day go a 0% tax environment guaranteed for 50 years. So there was no tax to be collected. Even in the mainland UAE, there is no tax for businesses anyways. But here it was guaranteed for 50 years. So the question is then, how do you kind of make this sustainable, right? As in you obviously can't be charging people obnoxious amounts of money for licensing fees to recover all your costs. So what was unique is that we embedded the real estate of that jurisdiction into the equation. So what happened is the government started with just assigning a plot of 110 acres to the DIFC authority. And the DIFC authority then had a commercial company as a subsidiary that owned that 110 acres plot. And it used the proceeds of either the land sales or rental income from the revenues that are generated from people coming and doing business there as a means to I may say investing in the regulatory environment and the business environment. And that was the model that was very successful, because it kind of enabled you to provide world-class regulatory environment without actually collecting taxes. But at the same time, you're not subsidizing anything, because that was just barren land. Now people are coming and working there and generating land sales and rental value out of that. And that was the case. The regulator, however, and the courts are separately funded by the government, so that you kind of keep independent of commercial interests of doing business. So the courts and the regulator gets the funding from the government, and then the rest of the businesses of the authority generate revenue, which then again goes back to the government. In addition, of course, as you ramp up, you also get government revenues like collecting transfer fees, licensing fees. You're processing visas for people, and so you get some amount of money from that. But that obviously is a slow ramp up, because on day one you start with one company, right? As in, you don't start with 10,000 people working on day one. So that ramps up, and over a period of time, then that became and becomes a substantial component of the revenue as well, in addition to the real estate side of contributing to the expenses of the business.
Got it. That makes total sense. It's almost like you're providing, we sometimes use this catchphrase within the company, but you're providing governance as a service effectively, which people are paying for as a service, the fee for accessing one of the best financial jurisdictions in the world, or a fee for registering your property in there, et cetera. It's much more of a value for value exchange than your normal governmental interactions where you're sitting in a DMV for hours or whatever the case may be. I really like it.